This is Control. We're on PlayStation 5 taking a look at the Ultimate Edition release of the game, just like we did recently with the Xbox Series X version of the title. So with that, you do need this new version of it. It includes both of the expansion DLC packs and some interesting visual options that actually have parity across both the next generation platforms, which is kind of interesting. So what you're seeing here is basically the visual option. So we get the technical ability of ray tracing here, which is a nice little touch to be added within the game. So for context, 1440p across both of the options, and you can see that right here from the settings. You go to display, and then we got graphics, and we have performance. So graphics is 1440p with temporal upscaling, same across both of them, except this runs at 30 FPS with ray tracing, and then we go to performance, which is 60 FPS with no ray tracing. So kind of noticing the difference in the floor there. So we're just going to kind of move through this a little bit quickly so we can show off more of the game at a later point. But you can just see really the increase of fluidity, which is quite nice in order to get things running, a lot more smoothly. So we're taking a look at this obviously heavily from a technical standpoint, but also from one of a review standpoint in case this is your first time looking at Control, which is definitely a great game. It is one of the most impressive titles I've played over the years. It's the best game, for me, it was my game of the year upon its release, which was really fantastic to experience what this game had to offer. Obviously, it loads a lot faster too. You get into the into the actual game like super quick, which is fantastic. And then the gameplay is really cool because you're basically kind of improving yourself and also improving this special tool that we're going to be getting in a second here, which is quite interesting. So this is a bit of a psychological thriller, a bit of an action game. It's definitely got some neat concepts and styles to it and a very neat visual aesthetic. No HDR support, by the way, in case you are wondering. And yeah, it's just a very well done game. Control. There we go, big title sequence coming up here as we run in. And I love how they do this big lettering across the screen. It feels very cool and very cinematic. And yes, we are going to be doing more direct comparisons between the visual options, but we're going to wait a little bit until we get to a point where we can better kind of show them off, because this is just sort of really setting the stage for the experience that we're having here. You're going to see a lot of the neat visuals, the really cool color just pop here in a sec. And again, it's a very gorgeous game. I think it's got a fantastic lead character here. I love her story and the perspective that we follow as well, because this is a situation where we're basically taking in her perspective. So she's an outsider. She has a bit of an understanding of this world, as to say, but at the same time, what role she kind of takes is one we're experiencing at the same time as her, so the abilities and everything like that feel fresh to as her discovering them as well, which I think is really cool and very interesting. So this is our special weapon. It's a gun, but it's much more than just a gun. It's something that is very powerful and very different and changes depending on the particular task and situation. And I think it looks quite lovely here. I mean, the game is visually quite impressive, and it's nice to play the combat with the fluidity of the 60 FPS. It really is a nice addition in this particular title. I like it a lot. But there is something about the ray tracing and the visuals of the next generation lighting that really is quite miraculous to me. And again, we're going to be getting into a segment up ahead here. We're going to be doing direct comparisons more so that you can see what those are like in action, which I think is kind of a delightful thing for sure. And again, this Ultimate Edition is kind of a standalone from that original title, so you are kind of starting fresh here, which obviously isn't necessarily the most ideal sort of situation for everyone. And it does seem like the controller does have some elements of kind of being responsive in this type of title, which is a neat kind of PS5 feature. You can really kind of feel the pushes, as to say, of the melee hits, and it's very cool. So I think this one kind of shows a little bit of a visual thing. Congratulations, director. Yes, we're stepping into the shoes here, but it's got a really cool kind of mystery to it, a really interesting sense of scale as we're trying to figure out what exactly we're doing. It's very cool, as you're seeing here. I think I'm going to skip the scene where there's more of a red freak out from her head, which is really neat. but we don't want to spoil things, so we're going to kind of get ahead here a little bit and then move onwards. So those are like the training sequences. There's also more like them as you get new different items of power. And well, these are really weird kind of elements that sort of expand the scope of the series in interesting ways. Well, not the series, but the world, because there's a lot more to it than just what you're seeing here. Here we go. This is where like the lighting and stuff is just nuts and so cool looking. Like this kind of mix here, this is a true Remedy experience. If you're not familiar with Remedy, they make such amazing titles such as Alan Wake and Quantum Break. You know, such really interesting psychological type thriller experiences that I absolutely have adored over the years. So it's really great to be kind of showing and talking about the game again on another platform, because this is one that I, you know, hold dear, because I just really love what they did with it. It's super cool. And yeah, we're going to get to some really interesting segments kind of coming up ahead here. I like it more when you're able to move around the environment a little bit better. At this point, it's just not quite as much freedom, because you don't kind of do like weird slides and stuff like that, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a bit. But then the overlay of the screen, like the visuals and stuff, are so cool. So we're going to finish off the enemies here, and this is where a good spot for us to start doing our initial kind of showcases of what the game offers. And there's these cool little bunkers occasionally that you'll come across. These will have like unlocks. There's lots of collectibles in the game. I haven't bothered really grabbing them because I don't really care too much for this particular you know, play of it. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but I'm mostly just trying to give you an idea of what these options are like. So I think there should be a few more enemies. So really, when we're playing this, take a look at the environment. That's going to be something we're going to be breaking down and talking about more. But we're literally breaking down the environment, which is kind of funny. But just look at how things kind of shattered. Now we look at the wood here, how we break the wood apart in different ways. And you can do this in a lot of different areas in the game. Seeing the wood kind of dynamically smash, seeing this glass break apart. It's really quite cool and very dynamic. So we're going to kill these last two guys here. And then we're going to talk more about the ray tracing. I think everybody's dead, right? Great. So for the example of ray tracing, we go up here. This is glass, right? You can see this is glass. We can't move through it. But it doesn't, it's see-through, right? It's just glass. But if we switch over and we go to the ray tracing, and ray tracing really is that technology that you need to pay attention to, because over the next generation you're going to see it implemented more and more in games, because it really changes the way that we experience them. It looks like a bit of a frame drop at this point. It's supposed to be 30, but it definitely feels like it's a little bit more heavy on that. But anyways, like I was saying, like just looking now, you can see the reflection of the character. You can see her reflecting. You could see the environment reflected back within the world, which is really, really quite cool. You can see that sense of scale there. And it really comes down to how you want to play a game. Do you want that kind of next generation of, you know, that visual element where you're able to experience this sort of really interesting dynamic? And then you look at the floors. So we kind of look at the floor, seeing how it's reflecting here. Seeing also like the shadows on certain objects like this Bucky here. And then seeing as we hopefully move it a little bit, seeing how the shadow adjusts. And then we switch back to the performance. And again, it comes down to how you want to play it. Some people, you love your fluidity, go for it. Totally available. But we go back here, and it's just gone, right? And you don't get the same shadow elements that you did prior. You don't get the level of reflections that you would get with ray tracing. They still do a good job of implementing them here with the non-ray tracing effects. But there's just something about getting that extra level of realism, and the lighting is so important in games, and it really is going to be one of those features is a huge deal going forward. It may not be yet. You may be like, oh, I want the frames, and again, you can do that. Oh, they update things fast in this office, am I right? But anyways, you know, you can have that option. You don't have to leave it behind. You could do the 60 FPS. Obviously, you lose the ray tracing, but you know, it's just kind of a cool thing to kind of have the option to see that future of gaming. And just like every time gaming changed, we went from like, you know, 2D to 3D and got more and more better graphics. You know, at times frames get lost because you get new tech and it takes time for the, you know, kind of hardware behind it to improve. And that's mostly what's happening here. Is it's very much in its infancy. I didn't even think we would have it on consoles this generation, quite honestly, but here it is, and it's only going to get better as time goes on. Seriously, there's going to be a certain point where you're going to have it all. You're going to have that 60 FPS. You're going to have that ray tracing. I mean, I don't think we're quite there yet unless we get some more advanced like DLSS like solutions that you see on things like the NVIDIA cards, but it's mostly the idea that, you know, we have this really interesting technology and we can use it now and we can see it now on consoles. And I think that's really quite exciting and something a little bit different that you might not have ever, you know, experienced before if you haven't, well, basically seen a game with ray tracing. It's quite wondrous. It really is quite cool. And, you know, I think this is kind of a bit of a poster child for it almost, if that makes sense. Just in terms of really being a game that uses the ray tracing. It's very demanding with that on. I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying it's a game that does implement it quite well and does some really neat things with it, because it's been a very technical treat for me to see this game. Because I've seen it on PC with ray tracing. I have RTX 2080 Ti, which I know, you know, at this point has gotten sort of pushed forward. I died here again. I did the Series X version of this as well with the ray tracing, and I died at this exact same spot also. Oh, I guess there's a good chance to show off the loading. Maybe it's a set thing anyway, so I can show you how the game's loading scenes. But you get into it like really fast again, which is nice, obviously, because you don't want to be, you know, waiting forever to play your game. It just kind of streams all quite well. And what's really neat, and you're going to see that as soon as we clear up this section here, and I don't die all pitifully, is the fact that this is a very dynamic building. It's a building that's got a lot of change to it. It's a building that adjusts a lot based on your kind of exploration or reactions to it, the places you go, the things you see within the game. And it is quite a treat in that regard. So I don't know why this guy is so hardcore. And I'm sorry if the controller is making noises. That's just due to the fact that, you know, it's got like this interesting sort of mechanic to it where you can kind of like, you know, the clicking in is kind of adjusted. I'm trying to think of the tension of it is adjusted on the PlayStation, which is kind of neat. But then, yeah, again, this like visual thing here with the director, it's such a cool aesthetic effect. And the story itself, again, is so great, but it's hard to dive into because I don't want to spoil anything. This is really something that you should, you know, experience freshly for yourself. And this won't. It's just setting the scene. It's just giving you the opening here. But this is how the world kind of changes as you open areas, you unlock new places, you explore new things. You get to see the world kind of dynamically adjust based on that. And it's just a really, really cool effect. And it just kind of makes it feel like a lot more of a dynamic location as well. So we've got to get these people out of not the boardroom, the shelter here, because that's kind of sets the stage for the next experience that we're getting to. We're talking, it's heavily narrative focused, blah 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 blah, kind of going over things. She's trying to be hidden and sneaky and stuff because she doesn't want them to know her true intentions as to why she's here. And you're taking control of being the director of this place, like we mentioned earlier. You're now in charge of this place, doing different things with it, trying to free all of the people that work for this particular secret business. And it digs deep into some really interesting kind of otherworldly story elements that I think would be fascinating if you've been following the Remedy titles in the past. I think you get a lot out of that, if that makes sense. It's a little bit harder to talk about from the Xbox perspective and then looking at PlayStation, just because, not that there's anything wrong with these titles being here, I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying, like, you don't have necessarily the same history of the titles unless you've also done on PC, because I mentioned Alan Wake and Quantum Break, and this one kind of feels like that expansion to that universe, if that makes sense. So this is going to be really cool, because we're going to head over, not the elevator, we're going to be going to the cafeteria. So the cafeteria is a really great place for me to do a showcase of, you know, the visual aesthetics of this game in action, but we are going to have to actually massacre a selection of folks. So this is kind of cool because you can like smash through the glass and break things. And like I said, later on you get much cooler effects and stuff like that to unleash upon your foes, which are neat. And I also love the game, and this is something that takes a bit of a technical toll with the experience, is the fact that when you are going through the world, you can... Whoa! Yeah, I forgot that thing blew up last time and just about absolutely decimated me. Gotta watch for those explosive things. Jeez. But the world is very responsive, so you can, like, you know, you can kind of smash up these, like, chairs. You can really send the environment kind of, like, breaking apart, if that makes sense. Okay, we gotta get over there, because we need some of that. Heal up a little bit from it. So these guys are pretty easy. I mean, they're not like boss characters or anything like that. They're They're not too hard to deal with. They're pretty standard enemies and stuff. It's a little bit more technical as we continue battling along. Oh yeah, I forgot there's this thing in the bathroom. And then break the stalls. Break all the little wood pieces. Great, so we've cleared out all the enemies, and now we can talk a little bit more about the ray tracing implementation within the experience, which is, again, just absolutely excellent. So take notice of the world at the 60 FPS here. You can see, oh geez, did I smash my glass? No, I did not. Okay, so it's just like, it's no reflection, there's not much going on, the floor, it's shiny, but it's not anything special. You get like subtle reflections, but then we switch over. And I don't regularly do this. I had a person on the Series X video being like, oh, I bet they're just like, how do you even play a game when you're switching back and forth like this? It's just to technically show it to you is the idea. But seeing how the deeper reflections here, the little different shadows within the chairs, and then we go up to the glass, and you're now seeing the full body being, oh, that's interesting. I think on the Xbox version, the blood carried over. I'd have to go rewatch that video. I'm actually curious about that. I'm pretty sure the blood was represented on the Xbox version. Huh. That's very neat. So some of the effects maybe aren't the same. Anyways, like I was saying, it's basically a perfect representation of what is being shown out there. And the character too. And it should be, and it's a little bit harder to do this, should be the shots as well to a degree. Seeing the lighting on the gun there, kind of in the corner. A little bit hard to show off. And then we also look over here. Ah, there was canisters on my Xbox version of this. I don't know where the canisters, maybe they got shot or something like that. But there was these canisters here, and you could see the reflection in the glass. And that was really, really neat. That's the big thing here for me is, like, you know, kind of the game's got great destruction, by the way. Just awesome, especially when you get to some of the more concrete type places and you're just, like, blasting stuff. But also look at the reflection continuing to be, like, pushed forward here as we move this thingy, right? Is it stuck now? There we go. But you can see like the objects and that kind of being moved and adjusted in the environment. And to me, that's really neat, that level of realism to the world. That extra layering of quality is just absolutely nuts. And then also destroying stuff in this game is such a treat, you know, just breaking down the environment I think is so cool. And then the wood splintering, like, it just makes the environment feel very reactive, right? You feel like you're in a place that's lively, that you're destroying. And that, again, is a lot of what ray tracing is about, is making the world more realistic. And it will someday be the standard. It'll be weird when games don't have ray tracing as part of their experience. That is what I'm trying to get across. You know, you see the fire here with the ray tracing as well, and it should kind of vanish in a sec. Again, kind of seeing that in the floor. And then it's gone, right? The heck is that? Anyways, like I was saying, it's just like a really neat visual element to it. And then we'll switch back over, and again, well, we should actually show off a bit more of the reflections here. So you saw that, we saw the reflections here, this is the environment's kind of reflecting. We see how we show up even on the map, like just like you would in real life. It's really, really quite cool. And then over here as well, you know, seeing the character reflect against even the dark panes of glass, it's really quite cool. And then you swap over to the performance mode for those frames, and it's gone. It's just a window, or you couldn't even tell maybe that this was a window at all, right? And then you go over here, no reflection at all. And you look at the floor, very subtle reflections, but not to the degree that ray tracing provides. And that's the big part of what I'm trying to get across, is it's a very neat visual effect. Obviously 60 FPS feels great for shooting, and great for movement. It's fantastic seeing the fluidity here, having the smooth you know, frame rate. That's great. That's a good way to play a game. It's a better way to experience what you know, this game has to offer in comparison to the last gen version. But at the same time, if you want what really does feel like a next generation effect, I do highly suggest in some areas giving ray tracing a chance, trying it out, seeing what it has to offer, and I think you'll be really floored by what it does in a game and how it changes the way that you interact with an experience. And I hope more games have the option to see ray tracing in action, because it really is just kind of, again, at the beginning of it. And in the past, you'd only see it on PC, but now we get to enjoy it on consoles too. And I say that as a new, great next generation visual feature. So it's great to have that available, and I hope you enjoyed this look and control, because this is a great game. Definitely check it out.